What is the purpose of a presidential inauguration? The United States is days away from swearing Donald Trump in as president for the second time, in what is sure to be an extravagant inauguration. At the thought of this, I can't help but dreadfully remember the first time this happened. I'd been living in the United States for over a year, and as a newcomer to the country's politics, I was struck by the excessive pageantry of the situation. Not that this concept was foreign to me. I've been to Epcot's American Adventure, and my own country is certainly prone to political tackiness. But it was just so pervasive. I couldn't escape coverage of every single detail of the event. Who was performing in it, who wasn't, how many people attended, and how many didn't. At the time, I naively dismissed this as an anomaly, one more sign of the rapid descent into fascism by way of aesthetics. But no. 4 years later, I was bombarded with that same obsession with another inauguration, this time by friends and allies. While I could certainly relate to the relief at the end of a Trump presidency, I didn't understand the repeated praise for the panache of the celebration, of a nearly identical ceremony where triumph of the will type imagery was being used to push a grandiose superiority. The continuous sharing of pictures of Biden and Harris heroically restoring democracy and liberalism, or at least appearing to do so. In his article, Why Do Presidential Inaugurations Matter?, Professor and author Dimitris Higalatas writes that public ceremonies like inaugurations are wrapped in pageantry. They involve music, banners, speeches, and more. The more important the moment, the more extravagant the ceremony. When we attend a ritual loaded with splendor, it is as if a little voice inside our brain is telling us, pay attention, because something important and meaningful is happening. As Higalatas remarks, there is no call for an inauguration in the Constitution, just for the new president to take an oath. This is, in theory, just a government worker starting a new job.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
And yet, it can't be just that.
I'm going to be the first elected lady president. I'm going to have a lovely inauguration. Billy Joel is going to sing.
The exuberance and theatricality transforms what could be a mundane, ordinary moment into something memorable and noteworthy. What's so noteworthy about these occasions? Why are Americans in particular so intent on elevating them? Something consistently commended from both sides of the aisle, be it at the terrifying prospect of a Trump presidency or when backtracking after a failed coup attempt, is that these ceremonies somehow exemplify an American ideal that the country should be proud of: the peaceful transfer of power.
To carry out the orderly and peaceful transfer of power.
Now, I understand this impulse. Throughout its history as a republic, there have been no coups in the United States, no violent overthrowing of its government. That doesn't happen there. It's reserved for countries such as mine, where in just over 200 years, presidents have been overthrown in 7 different occasions. And let's be honest, that's probably a low figure for Latin American standards. But does a lack of a successful coup d'etat actually mean the American transfer of power is always peaceful, or is there just a broad definition of peace that maintains the illusion of such transitions? What happens in the rare instance when the transfer of power is, in fact, violent? What truth is there then to this noble ideal?
Just trying to get to the truth. That's what reporters do.
The truth. Well, I've grown accustomed to a great divide between what people believe and what I know to be real.
Fine, I will settle for a story that's believable.
Jackie is a 2016 film directed by Pablo Larraín and written by Noah Oppenheim about First Lady of the United States Jacqueline Kennedy as she copes with the assassination of her husband, President John F. Kennedy, on November 22, 1963. The film follows 2 intertwined lines: the planning for Kennedy's funeral and a journalist's interview with Jackie weeks after the assassination, both of which bring up memories of her work, marriage, and public role during her husband's presidency, and in the wake of its abrupt end. Jackie, like the real woman behind it, has a lot of layers. On the surface, It's the kind of movie you'd expect to earn an Oscar nomination for Best Actress, a character study about an important real-life figure in a moment of crisis. You'd hardly find a better story to inspire a movie like that. The assassination of John F. Kennedy is easily one of the most iconic moments in the history of the United States, and one that can be and is easily exploited in Hollywood. However, the sensationalist aspect of having a First Lady plan a funeral for her husband, the most powerful man in the world, is only the surface of Jackie, the general setup. Her real crisis is a lot more abstract than that. She is not merely tackling the logistics of a state funeral while suffering through her grief. She is discovering new demands of her job, for which there are no real precedents. One could imagine a juicier Jackie biopic, one focused on reconciling who Kennedy was as a husband, his tabloid-worthy infidelities and whatnot, with her own grief. But this Jacqueline Kennedy is not so much concerned with her role as a wife. She is, instead, focused on her starring role in the ongoing American experiment. What can she do as a departing First Lady to positively impact the United States? She is keenly aware that her power and abilities are not in policy. One might even say that she knows there isn't a tangible way in which she might make people's lives better. That was her husband's job. Her job is to make sure that things look good. Historically, it's always been an unofficial duty of a First Lady of the United States to furnish and decorate the White House. When in 1800, John Adams became the first president to move into the building while it was still unfinished, it was up to his wife Abigail Adams to make the 6 habitable rooms comfortable. Compare this choice of word by the White House Historical Society with subsequent president and notable widower Thomas Jefferson's utilitarian purchases. Jacqueline Kennedy, disappointed at the lack of antique pieces in the White House, chose to take on this task by extensively restoring the White House and acquiring pieces of furniture that matched the building's history and architecture. Not only was she leaning into her growing role as a style icon of the late 50s and early 60s, just contrast her aesthetic to that of previous First Lady Mamie Eisenhower, but she was also playing into her own family legacy. Her great-great-grandfather Michael Bouvier was commissioned to build furniture for President John Quincy Adams's White House back in 1825. In more ways than one, Jacqueline Kennedy was both continuing and creating tradition.
Royalty. You make it sound like royalty.
Well, for royalty, you need tradition, and for tradition, you need time.
Well, I guess it has to start somewhere, right? There has to be a day one.
Jackie was particularly smart about this project because it could have easily been unpopular or met with indifference by the public. Why spend taxpayer money restoring a house only a few rich people ever get to live in? To preempt this, she raised funds privately to pay for it, later hosting a television special introducing the restoration to the public.
I didn't do that program for me. I did it for the American people.
Jackie screenwriter and news producer Noah Oppenheim said of this, "I think Jackie, in conceiving of this CBS televised tour of the White House, made an even more conscious decision to use TV cameras to speak directly to the American people and craft a certain story that she wanted to tell about her and her husband and their place in American history. She did it by bringing these cameras into their home, creating this illusion of transparency, and talking about the historical artifacts that she had surrounded herself with and the men and women who had lived in that house before them. It was quite a modern idea, and a modern performance as well. Be it because of her history studies, her journalism work, or her life as a socialite, Jacqueline Kennedy understood how to craft a collective narrative by way of aesthetics."
Now, I loved that house, and I wanted to share it with the American people to impart a sense of America's greatness. Objects and artifacts last far longer than people, and they represent important ideas, history, identity, beauty.
She was concerned about how things looked. Yes, in terms of taste and artistic value, but also optics and public opinion. By carefully telling the story of the White House through its decor and furnishings, She was using both history and grandeur to sell a national narrative to the American people. And the movie poses that this is the same approach she had when handling the aftermath of her husband's assassination.
Can I send somebody to help you change before we land? All those cameras, people will be watching.
Let them see what they've done.
She has to create history, now in real time, and carve a place for her husband in it.
I believe that the characters we read about on the page end up being more real than the men who stand beside us.
We can only watch as this woman has to put aside her own grief and compartmentalize it to desperately try to control the narrative she's been put in. She can't just be a widow. She has to reluctantly become a leader. What kind of story can she even create for her country under these conditions?
Losing a president is it's like losing a father, and you were a mother to all of us, and that's a very good story.
It is a very good story. But does Jackie see it that way? Is that the story she wanted to tell? What was she aiming for?
And that last song, that last side of Camelot is all that keeps running through my mind. Don't let it be forgot that for one brief, shining moment, there was a Camelot.
This is taken almost verbatim from the first interview Jacqueline Kennedy gave after the death of her husband, a profile for Life magazine that immediately gave a name to the Kennedy years. When trying to distill all of her complicated emotions into a single word, Jacqueline Kennedy chose Camelot, King Arthur's idyllic kingdom that had recently been the subject of a successful Broadway musical by Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Loewe. I probably don't need to tell you this, but Camelot was never a real place.
I'm Arthur, King of the Britons.
I didn't know we had a king. I thought we were an autonomous collective.
Even if King Arthur in some shape or form did exist, he never led a kingdom named Camelot, a concept that was not part of the original Arthurian legends and came to enter the stories as a French invention centuries later. Camelot is the archetypical mythical utopia, a once great kingdom whose glories have been lost to time. By tying her husband's presidency to this concept as the nation still mourned, Jackie was being very deliberate in her messaging.
King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It's what Camelot's about. Ordinary men banding together to fight for a better world. Don't misunderstand me. Jack wasn't naive, but he had ideas. Ideas he could rally others to believe in.
In fairness, said Noah Oppenheim about this, I think politicians have always tried to sell a fairy tale to the American people. Sometimes, those fairy tales have come true, or at least portions of them. Often, they have not. All throughout Jackie, everyone, not just her, is constantly preoccupied with optics. How will Bobby Kennedy look if he lets his family walk in a procession unprotected? How will Lyndon B. Johnson look if he walks behind them? What are the implications of a closed casket? Is it tasteful or fair to compare Kennedy to the man who won the Civil War? What if the pageantry is too much? What if it's not enough? At no point is the lack of control over the general narrative more evident than when Johnson and Bobby Kennedy can only watch as Lee Harvey Oswald, Kennedy's assassin, is murdered live on television while being escorted by the police.
This is making us look like a bunch of goddamn barbarians.
And yeah, it kind of is. This is not what the peaceful transfer of power should look like. This is not a civil democracy. It is indeed making the government look lost and powerless. This isn't what the United States of America is. How do you regain control over this situation if you're looking to maintain that ideal of what constitutes America? Well, what is that ideal in the first place? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? How do you communicate that? Such abstract concepts can be hard to express tangibly, especially when the contradictions are evident and you can't quite point at real-life examples. This isn't life. This isn't liberty. Are these people pursuing happiness? You need symbols. It's about protecting the Constitution. You need imagery. It's about pledging allegiance to the flag. You need pageantry. It's about having a riderless horse at the funeral procession, even though Kennedy didn't ride horses, because Abraham Lincoln's funeral had his riderless horse. And not only was Lincoln also a slain president, he is one who is remembered fondly and has become synonymous with America. Just like Jackie wants her Jack to be.
Must get this right, Bill. Must get this right. Has to be beautiful. Did you tell them we need a horse-drawn carriage? We have to march with Jack. Everyone. A big, beautiful procession that people will remember.
The funeral doesn't just need to be held, it needs to be remembered. It needs to represent something. It needs to create a story, real or not, that will comfort and unite people, not just in 1963, but for years to come.
Maybe that's what they'll all believe now, Camelot. People like to believe in fairy tales.
And you? Do you believe you did him justice?
Before the cringe coverage of Joe Biden's inauguration I mentioned earlier, there was the election. November 7th, 2020. After 4 days of suspenseful vote counting, the election had finally been called for Joe Biden. I was with my friend Cam in San Francisco on our way to spend the afternoon having a little picnic at Mission Dolores Park. From our isolated blanket, we saw people celebrate Biden's victory, which, innocuous enough. I get it. I too was glad Trump would no longer be president. However, in hindsight, I really wish I had taken footage of this. I'd have B-roll to show. But not only were people passing around a life-size Joe Biden cardboard cutout from one socially distant bubble to the other as if it were crowd surfing, but some twink showed up dressed as Joe Biden himself, gray hair and all, and started acting like Mickey Mouse at Disneyland, waving, posing for pictures, and cheesing it up for the crowd. I don't know if that's the relationship we should have with our politicians. There is a reason national projects require inspirational historical figures. Without founding fathers or originary myths, it can be hard to unite people behind a shared sense of identity. And as far as the present goes, current leaders are in charge of not just embodying those figures to some degree, but also promising there isn't just a past to look back on. They need to reassure us there's a future to work for. These two things go hand in hand. And so, when Jackie worries her restoration of the White House might have been a mere vanity project for her own legacy, her confidant, artist Bill Walton, comforts her.
People need their history. It gives them strength. They need to know that real men actually lived here, not ghosts and storybook legends. People who faced adversity and overcame it. What you've done in this house matters.
But this comes with a caveat. If one solely engages with political figures superficially, as icons of a golden age, as martyrs for their country, or as a break from the war sky, then what are you asking of them going forward, but even more fairy tales and symbolic gestures? As Oppenheim says, one could argue that some of the anger and cynicism in this country right now is a byproduct of people feeling like they've been sold a false bill of goods in the past. I don't think there's anything unique about that. Presidents are always selling a vision of what the country can be. People obviously are attracted to the sunniest, most appealing version of that. Unfortunately, I think people feel like they've been burned many times before. I think, like I say, that's part of the anger, cynicism, and frustration that is clearly at work. As I explored in a previous essay, the empty promises of what the United States could be were, by 1963, frustrating large swaths of the population. But the Kennedy years did, to some degree, revive an optimism that things could get better, a hope perfectly encapsulated in this new myth of Camelot. In modeling JFK's funeral after Lincoln's, in making world leaders walk behind a casket, and in exposing her own tragic vulnerability for the cameras to see, Jacqueline Kennedy successfully encased her husband in powerful imagery. Is it sincere grief? Is it propaganda? Is it both?
But after I realized that all the pageantry, all the demands I made to honor him, they It wasn't for Jack or his legacy. It was for me.
Once the funeral has been taken care of, towards the very end of the movie, Jackie finally leaves the White House. Her motorcade passes a department store where the windows are being redressed. The mannequins being installed in the new displays bear a striking resemblance to her. Hair, clothes, pose, imitations of the troubled Jackie we've spent several days with are now an aspiration to purchase. As the screenplay puts it, Jackie stares in disbelief at her own image frozen in time, the widow, forever in mourning. Could this be the realization that all throughout this matter, this focus on how things will look, on how they'll be remembered, on what they mean, not what they are, will result in just that? The world's most glamorous widow burying not a person, but an ideal we're never to question again.
Will those ideals slip on?
Sure they will. Of course, there will be great progress. And there'll be other great presidents. The Johnsons have been so generous to me. There won't be another Camelot. Not another Camelot.
At this point, you're not mythologizing anymore, but glorifying. You've made it a legend, and those are untouchable.
She wants them to always remember, for one brief, shining moment, there was a... Camelot. Yeah.
This is, I think, what weighs down Jackie in her interview. She is confident in her choices, but unsure about what they accomplished. After all, she was lost throughout this whole journey, ambushed by a desperate demand for meaning, for purpose, for any sort of long-lasting impact amidst those nebulous ideals that constitute America, whatever they may be. Vague, hypocritical, naive, obsolete values that can't be found anywhere but in the pageantry Jackie procured for her public, the splendor they needed.
Your husband drove cars, he didn't ride horses.
Yes, and there should have been more of them. There should be more horses, more soldiers, more crying, more cameras.
Did Jackie simply participate in the upkeep of a deeply flawed project rather than in a solution to its problems? Could this be her wondering if she's merely refurbished the old rooms in a house with a deeply rotten foundation? Is her legacy done for the moment Lady Bird Johnson picks new curtains?
What happens when the next president's wife comes into the White House?
New carpets, new furniture, new paintings. Things will always appear to change from president to president. But the building, the nation, they both remain the same. Change and consistency, simultaneously promised by way of the same pomp and circumstance every 4 years. Call it a narrative, a pageant, propaganda, or a fairy tale. It may never, never be real, but it could always feel true.
I lost track somewhere. What was real? What was performance?
In her grief and at the behest of her brother-in-law, Jackie consults a priest for guidance. She is frustrated at the senseless nature of her position, crushed by the burden of a miscarried daughter, a dead newborn son, a murdered husband, and a newfound duty to her compatriots.
There's a heaven and there's your God. So all these empty promises. What kind of God takes a father from his 2 little children?
The priest draws the only possible conclusion.
Because you have been chosen. So that the works of God can be revealed in you.
That's all the comfort she gets. She's a pawn in a divine mission. One more piece in the ever-growing myth-building of her nation.
Why are you doing this, Mrs. Kennedy?
Oh, I'm just doing my job.
And she's supposed to feel proud of it, even though there's nothing there. Just a myth, a dream, a utopian vision that year after year falls shorter and is no closer to being fulfilled.
But God, in his infinite wisdom, has made sure it is just enough for us.
Just Camelot.
But I can assure you that it was a spectacle.
Hey everyone, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Kevin over at the Patreon for supporting the channel, as well as everyone you see on screen now. If you would like to support the channel and allow me to make videos more often, please head over to the Patreon link, which you will see on screen and in the description below. Thank you all, and have a good night. Jackie was particularly... No. I write particularly so much into my scripts, and I always struggle with pronouncing it. You guys like my monorail mug?